Hello and welcome to Defense Diaries. I'm your host, Bob Mata, and let's welcome our guest immediately, the one, the only, Bill Dorsch. What is up, Bill?
Well, I'm up, and I almost didn't make it. Luckily, my wife heard the alarm. I slept in a separate room because I didn't want to wake her, but she put her alarm on, so that was good.
She's a good woman. She's a good woman, and she
Yeah.
knows. It's like it's early for you, Bill. I mean, it's not obscenely early like it was, the first 7 or 8 episodes.
6 o'clock ain't bad, but when you got
It's
to get up at
doable.
4.
It's doable.
Yeah.
So welcome. Glad to see you again. This is our continuing coverage of a couple of things. One, what I like to call Hunting Gacy, the continuing search for additional Gacy victims. And we have injected one Reynaldo Guevara, America's worst cop ever, into this discussions that we've been having because if you don't know, if you missed last week's episode, Bill happens to be the whistleblower who ratted out the worst cop in American history, who put 51 innocent men in prison who all served 10, 15, 20, 25 years that were all innocent, 100% innocent. 41 of them and counting have been fully exonerated. So Bob has been on the YouTubes a lot today, Bill. Our people are getting a lot of Bobs. So what do you want to dig into tonight, Bill?
Well, we're going to do several things. We're going to get back into the Gacy investigation. We're going to talk about Russell Nelson from he disappeared from Minnesota.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about Guevara a little bit too, but in putting in there two other things that people don't know. First off, people, they say, they know, everybody knows cops, some, but you don't know what cops do. Everybody's different, I've gone to parties and somebody says, "Oh, you're a cop, so-and-so." And you go, "Yeah, I know so-and-so." And they tell you stories. They say, "Oh, this guy said he was in this, he was shot at, he was blown up, he was in car wrecks." And I'm thinking to myself, he's got a foot post. He don't do anything. He goes store to store looking for something. That's all he does. But people don't know who you are or what you did.
Right.
First off, I became a cop in 70. I left in 94, not because of Gacy. I left because of what was going on at Area 5 with Reynaldo Guevara and others, where they were putting innocent people in prison, and the city didn't want to stop it. They basically said, "Shut up, Dorch, and don't write any reports." Okay. And then I retired as soon as I could when I was 50 years old, moved up to northern Wisconsin, built a home that I always wanted to build out there in the middle of the dead end road, where I could see it coming. And got bored pretty quick. And I volunteered to work with the sheriff's departments in Sawyer County. And of course, I've got the experience, and I went to the sheriff and he said, "Bill, you're going to have to go through the entire training course like a new recruit." And I said, I don't think so. But I said, "If you're going to pay for it, I'll go." And I went to the school for the training, and I was told right away, "Well, you only need about 25 hours, Bill. You don't need 300. But when I got done with that, Bob, when I got done with the training course, they offered me a job actually teaching and training other police officers. So I did that for about a year and a half, but I was still kind of bored with that. So I decided to get my PI license and start working as a private investigator. And I was still once I did that, I started getting calls immediately from attorneys up there on homicide cases. And even still, I was getting calls from Chicago. And that was my niche. The homicides is the thing that I always liked doing because I thought it was the ultimate crime, and the search for the offender was something that was into me,
Right.
And after a while with the working as a private investigator, I came into contact with people up there. Now, most people don't know this. I mean, I was retained, I think it was about 2000, to do an undercover investigation of a police department. Okay. They had complaints about a small town, Somerset, Wisconsin, with not a large police force, a lot of volunteers, but they were doing things that started with drinking with girls, young girls, and skinny dipping with the girls. And the mayor of the city and the attorney for the city, they asked me to investigate and see what was going on. Well, with the help of one really trusted police officer, young man on the job, I started my investigation undercover, even burglarized the police department one night to get into the building to search for records. And it ended up in getting the chief of police charged with criminal crimes, and he was fired, and almost everyone else on the police department was either fired or charged with a crime. So the whole police department was shut down. Okay, the people in Somerset were happy with me because there was a lot of problems with the police, suspicions that they had even done some arsons of people who complained about them. All right. So, I mean, I don't think many guys have had to go out and do an undercover on a police department, but I did do that. Of course.
So what did you sniff out? Did you sniff
Oh
out?
yeah. Well, what I found out was they were taking government federal funds for traffic stuff, and they weren't doing any work on it, but just separating the money, sharing the money between themselves.
So it was like some Grey Lord shit, kind of,
Yeah.
on a smaller scale.
They had big concerts up there in the summertime, rock concerts. And
Where, Alpine Valley? Was that the venue?
That's right. It's close. That's it.
Yeah.
But Ozzy Osbourne was the head guy out there every summer he played, and they drew big crowds, mostly from over the border from Minnesota. And what the police department would do, Bob, is they would set up traffic stops in cars with young people who had alcohol or drugs. They would confiscate the alcohol and drugs, but they wouldn't inventory it. Okay. So, I mean, when I burglarized the police department, that included, and I didn't do it by myself. The city attorney came with me, and the mayor of the city came with me. All right. When we got into the police department, on the one night every 2 weeks when there's nobody there, another community takes over the policing. And in the lockers of individuals, we found narcotics and guns and things like that. We found out that the guns they were taking off the street, they were selling to a gun shop in Indiana. Okay, wow. Instead of having them turned in and destroyed. The narcotics, we can only suspect that they were using them for personal use or selling.
Yeah, a little side hustle.
Yeah, and the alcohol, which they were able to fill one, sometimes two rooms in the police station with confiscated alcohol from the people coming over for the concerts. Well, two of the sheriff's sergeants on the police department owned strip clubs. Okay. And so the alcohol was going, it used to be destroyed right there on site at the police department.
Yeah.
And I found out they had stopped doing that several years ago, and they were putting in their personal cars, taking it to the bars.
And then selling it to all the
avoiding, of course, no cost, no overhead.
That's a fucking great business model, man.
Yeah. So that's what they were doing. I mean,
listen, Bill, look, in defense of those cops, look, you guys make shit money for putting your lives on the line. Can you really sweat these guys for the little side hustle?
I'll tell you the one big thing for me, the big difference between the big city cop and the rural cop, like in Sawyer County, was when I needed help, it was close. I could, just put out a 10-1, say I need help, and in minutes, I'm getting people coming. Out there, you might only have two cars working in the entire county. So the other guy might be 40 miles away. Right. So there's a big risk to that too.
Oh, for sure.
Fortunately, there's not the crime like you have here.
Right. I mean, we're talking like rural Wisconsin, like right over the border. Like I've seen more shows than I can count up at Alpine Valley. they always get me for speeding up there. The minute I cross the border, they fucking nail me every time. And I'm like, oh my God. But yeah, I mean, look, in like we have a former NYPD homicide detective in here. Michael's in here with us.
Oh.
He partners up with my friend Joe Jackalone. And you know, I mean, Michael tell you, man, like the small town shit, anything goes. You know, I mean, there's really no oversight. You know, it's kind of like the honor system more than anything. You know, unless you get, you know, somebody that's really interested enough to hire somebody like you to go in and burglarize the police department to see what the hell they're up to. You know, it's like,
exactly.
It's crazy. It's crazy. All right, so you're in retirement. You're doing the PI work. You're getting some interesting shit going on. What leads you into what leads you back into Gacy or into Gacy? Because everybody that's listened to the first, you know, 7-8 episodes knows the famous story, how you had dinner with the, you know, an evening with the Gacy. You know, you, your wife, and your kid are all invited over to the house. You guys have that wonderful meal and enjoy his electric personality, and you know, where him just being the big giant creep that he is, showing you his gun, showing you his handcuffs. Hey, Bill, you want to come here, Bill? You want to get in my handcuffs? All that shit. So you survive that thing. You see Gacy a couple more times. So there's even more famous story where you see him at 3 a.m. outside of Miami and Elston with the shovel. You're getting off duty. It's the early morning hours. You say, "Hey, what's up there, John? What are you doing, pal?" And he says, "Hey, there's not enough hours in the day." You know, whatever the fuck he says.
Exactly.
Gacy gets arrested. You go to your you know, superiors, or you go and you're just like, "Hey, I mean, actually you went over. Who did you go to with that story initially to just kind of give him a heads up?"
Well, of course, I'm working at that time. I'm in a tactical unit, but you know, you go into work and you say, God, you know, I know this guy. The whole story. You repeat the story again. I met him at the parties, and the party is home. The whole thing. I met this guy, but the thing is digging up the bodies day and day and day, and so I know I got to put out this information because of the place on Miami Avenue. So I didn't I mean, I told my bosses in the police department in Chicago, but Chicago's not handling the investigation. It's Cook County Sheriff's Department. Right. So I contacted the Cook County Sheriff's Department on phone and said, "This is a place you got to look at." I told them who I was. I told them about the 3 o'clock encounter with Gacy and my only suspicion about the property, no other proof. But, you know, as a cop, you know, you got to think they're taking your information. They're asking people for information. You got to, I assumed, and this is where we trust too much law enforcement. We trust too much the news media, okay? They're not giving you the full shot here. They tell you what they want you to know, okay? So when I called the sheriff's department and said, "You got to go over there and talk to people there," you assume that they're going to do that because it's a massive crime. I mean,
you're a fucking cop.
Yeah,
You're a Chicago cop calling them saying you've got intel. So
and of course, I learned later, Bob, that other policemen who had information about the very site had called too, and they were police, and they were told the same thing. We don't want any more bodies, okay? And that's going to be part of what I'm going to talk to you about. I'm going to talk about a guy named Kerry Silverstein.
Okay.
All right. 64-year-old man living alone in Chicago suddenly goes missing. All right.
What year?
God, when was that? It was about 2014, 2015.
Oh,
all right. I got contacted by the family. I'm a private investigator. I'm back in Chicago now.
Right.
Okay. I'm doing homicide cases. And I got a phone call from the family because one of the women I talked to related to the missing party had at one time been a Cook County state's attorney.
Okay.
All right. So she knew of me and she reached out for me. And it was just the missing, but they reported him missing. And because he's 64 years old, Bob, nobody's looking for him. You know, he's not a 7-year-old kid, 8-year-old kid. He's not a person that they know if they have medical problems. He's just a 64-year-old guy that lived alone and suddenly he's not home. So nobody's looking for him.
Yeah, now
But
they have alerts for that shit for seniors, but
yeah,
back in
yeah,
2014 they didn't. Yeah.
yeah. And the cops will come out, they'll take a report, and then they'll look around the block a couple of times, and then they go home at the end of their shift and nobody else is looking. You know.
Right.
My father, when he had dementia, when he had Alzheimer's, I mean, he went missing from the house a couple of times. I mean, he walked out of the house. We stopped that by putting another lock that he wasn't used to, and he never could figure it out. All right. But he would walk away. We'd call the police. And usually the 2 times that we asked them to look for him, they found him at the church. He had walked to the church.
Getting right with the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but the police, do what they can, but nobody's thinking of ill. Nobody's thinking something's going to happen. Right. But anyway, I'll get into this in a little more detail later. But what happens with Carrie Silverstein?
Before you do that, Bill, the crowd wants to know: are you doing shots? They keep seeing you drinking out of a little.
I'm doing coffee. I'm not drinking because I'm sitting in a real hard chair because someone complained about the noise from my office chair. So
squeaking.
Not wanting to cause them any more harm.
But Bill, your chair was masking the noise that my chair makes. So now you've really fucked me, Bill. I don't like it.
Yeah, but I thought if it's bothering you that much, I don't want to cause you any ill will or discomfort telling me you can't sleep because you hear the noise. I decided to put my chair away and bring up this hard chair to sit in. And if I fall out of it,
that hip's not going to
work well. That's not going to work well.
All right. Sorry to get you off track.
Yeah, but we're going to tell you quickly about them. I learned very quickly on in my investigation that searching for this man and talking to the police about it, I found out he wasn't missing. He was murdered.
Oh,
he was murdered. He was murdered in his own apartment. All right. I found evidence of the crime scene.
Wait a second. Let me back it up. So did the family contact you?
Yes, the family. One was the state's attorney that had retired, was living in Upper Michigan. She came down to Chicago. Another family member from New Jersey flew into Chicago, and I met with them in Chicago, and they told me about the missing. Okay. And could I look into it?
How long was he missing at that point?
Probably about 6-7 days. But he lived alone. He was sort of a rough individual. He was argumentative type of person, but he would call them every day. He would call the one person in the family every day. He was always asking for money because he didn't have a job often. Right. And they were supporting him. Fortunately for him, they had the money to do that. Okay. Right. But when he went missing, the first place I went, of course, they said they reported. I went to the police department to talk to people there. And nobody's looking, like I said, but through my investigation, I quickly learned that he had a party. Well, we're going into it. Might as well go into it right now.
Yeah, fuck it. Let's go.
Yeah. I learned that he had a birthday party at his home, and he shared his apartment sometimes with other people. But this night, Carrie Silverstein, who was a 64-year-old white man, had a group of people over, friends, including whites and blacks from the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And during the course of the party, he had said some things to the girlfriend of one of the guys, and the guy was offended by what he heard him saying, and he went and he punched Carrie Silverstein in the face. But then this guy left the apartment and walked away to cool off.
Okay.
After a while, he came back into the party, and he's joined by another woman and a young guy, and they proceed. The four of them now, the guy, his girlfriend, the other guy, and the girl, they start beating him, kicking him on the floor. And finally, they're taking turns with a heavy metal frying pan, smashing his head until they killed him.
Oh, my God.
Until they killed him. The other people at the party, they left as soon as the beating started. Okay.
No one thought to call the cops?
Well, nobody knew that there was going to be a murder here either. They thought it was
the old guy getting his ass whipped. Like, how young?
Yeah, like I said, he was kind of argumentative type of person. He probably had arguments with everybody that was ever.
So are you saying this guy deserved a beating, at least to some
No,
kind
nobody. Not, of course not. But so anyway, everybody else fled the apartment and went home. But these people now had a problem. They had beaten him to death. And what do we do with the body? So what they did do is they cleaned up the crime scene. They cleaned up the kitchen. They took his body into the bathroom. They washed his body of the blood, took his clothes, and then they put him in 2 garbage bags, and they carried him out and threw him into a dumpster.
Wow.
Okay. Well, and then they left, of course. Well, what happened when I went there with the family, when I contacted them, when I told the family I had information that he might have been murdered, the family met with me and we went to the apartment. Okay. And
wait, but you're jumping way. How did you get information that he might have been murdered?
Well, I had it from several sources, but the best one was a neighbor in an apartment building living right next door. When I talked to her, she said, I asked her, do you know Kerry Silverstein? She says, yeah, I know him. His apartment's right over here. I can see his back of his building and everything. And I says, well, have you seen him lately? She says, no, I haven't seen him for a while. I said, but anything suspicious? Well, yeah, one day, she says, one evening, she said, I don't know exactly when, I saw these 2 black guys walking down the stairs from the apartment building where Kerry lived, carrying a large something in plastic bags. And she says, I was suspicious because they didn't throw the bags into their dumpster. They walked around and threw it into my dumpster next door.
Oh, geez.
So she said after they left, she says she was suspicious and she walked out there and she opened up the dumpster and she looked and she saw liquid on the dark plastic bags. She said, I didn't know what it was. Could have been blood, but I didn't want to know. I just left. And nobody ever talked to her until I talked to her. Well, unfortunately, the dumpster was picked up and disposed of at a landfill. Okay. But here, now I've got this information. Now I got information, two policemen, uniform patrol from the 24th district. One evening, were right after he had disappeared. On the exact date, I don't know anymore. They made out a contact card because they saw these 2 people, a man and a woman, walking down the back stairs of the apartment late at night, and they stopped them to investigate what was going on. And they made out a contact card with their names, which was a good start for me. Yeah. Okay. And that was helpful in identifying the 2 people that had been at the party that what I found out later were involved in the murder. And like I said, other guests at the party were able to name the people that were beating him. Wow. Okay. But now I've got information about a possible murder here. So I, with the family, I recovered. Well, no, first I went back to my home. I called the Area 3 Detective Division and I talked to the sergeant and I said, the case involving this Kerry Silverstein is not a missing. It's very possible that he was murdered. And I explained the whole story to him about what I had learned. And I told him about his body being thrown into the dumpster and removed from the scene. And he said to me, Bill, and I didn't know the sergeant, but he said, Bill, when you find the body, call me back. And he hung up the phone. Okay. Now, I don't like rejection. Okay. So I contacted the family. The family met with me again. And this time we go to the apartment, and not the first, the first time we're going to the apartment now. And I'm looking through it and I'm finding evidence of blood in the bathroom. Okay. Under the shower mat. And on the shower curtains and under the sink with towels. So I knowing that the family's going to have to give up the apartment because they're, the landlord wants it back. I don't want the crime scene destroyed, but I have to act quickly. So I recovered the shower curtains, the bath mats, and somebody's what I thought were bloody towels. and I take them with me to my home. Now I call that same sergeant.
So Bill, like, just to like restate, at this point, you're a private investigator. You've gone to the cops. You've said, look,
Yeah.
I have evidence that this guy was murdered. They tell you when you find a body, Bill,
Yeah, when I find it,
come back
yeah.
and talk to us. So now
See?
you've gone back to the crime scene in order to collect the evidence yourself, which you bring to your house.
And so I call the same sergeant again, and I say, listen, this is the way it is. I've been to the apartment now. I've found evidence of at least a beating and possibly leading to a homicide. And I know you're reluctant to be involved because you don't want any bodies. I said, I've recovered the evidence that I found.
Oh, man.
And I have it at my apartment. And I said, here's what we're going to do. I am not coming down to your office. You're going to send detectives to me where I'm living in the suburbs here. And I will give them the evidence and I will give them the information. And if you don't do it, I'm going to the newspaper tomorrow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that evening they were there. They came to my house. I gave them the information. I gave them the names. I gave them the evidence. And I'll tell you this, the detectives did a great job.
Nice.
They did a great job. They got confessions from all four parties.
Wow.
The two primaries were still sitting in jail when this happened, like in 2015.
Yeah.
They're still sitting at Cook County Jail in 2021, not
Wow.
yet gone to trial.
Holy shit.
Oh, because they're hoping they don't want to count this as a body. They don't want to count this as a homicide, really.
Plus those shithead defense attorneys were probably trying to challenge the evidence because you brought it to your house.
Oh yeah. Well,
little chain of custody issue there. They had some private investigator.
Well, you know what?
The shit.
Bob, they pretty much pushed me out of the store, out of the reporting.
I'm sure.
On paper.
I'm sure they did. I'm sure you're a big gaping hole in their chain of custody.
Yeah. But that's the reluctance, and it is because, and I've seen this in other communities too. Homicides are a big thing.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a 64-year-old man. Now, city, like I've said before in the Gacy case, their reasoning was their reputation. We were allowing this, not allowing, but they couldn't stop Gacy because of the times. You didn't have computers. You had a large city with 5 different police office areas, and you're not communicating with each other. You would take a person would call and say, my son or daughter is missing. They would send a patrol unit to a person's house. They'd sit down with the family. They'd write out a 1 or 2 page report, and then they would get back in their car and they'd look if it was a young person or elderly person. They'd look, but they're getting other calls and other assignments. They're going to other jobs and they're forgetting about this missing person. And after their tour ends, they go into the office and they take that report, Bob, and they place it in a basket on the sergeant's desk. All right. Now, the sergeant's not even looking at it. That's in the basket there because the mailman, police officer, they travel the city by car to pick up the reports at the 24 different police stations. And they would take the reports down to headquarters, which was at 11th and State at that time. So it would be turned into the missing persons unit there in the youth division. And of course, now they're just looking at it and they're deciding, this has got to go to area 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whichever area. So the next day, the report's going driven again, but now dropped off at the youth offices. So you've got 1 or 2 days have already gone by. And the youth officers, they get the report, they look at it, and then they assign it to a youth officer to investigate the missing. Well, that guy might be working, but then maybe he's not. He might have his 2 days or 3 days off, and he's not going to get that report until he comes back. So you might have 5 more days before any work is done. And, you got they're getting 10 jobs in their mailbox. They got a lot of work to do. And they're not running out to the house of the missing person's family. They're only on the phone, Bob, and they're making that one phone call. Has Johnny come home yet? Oh, he has? Thank you very much. No problems. Thank you. Johnny came home. All good. But if he's not there, they're just saying, well, he's what, 18, 19? Oh, he's probably okay. He's probably with friends. Call me when he comes home. But he's not, the police aren't looking for the person. And that was the problem with Gacy. They didn't know if when a person went missing, there was no connection to another person going missing or a connection to Gacy. Right. Now with computers, I trust that wouldn't happen. But back then, it's not a surprise. In Chicago or any other big city, you had maybe 20,000 missing people a year.
Right.
The volume was immense, and the youth officers are swarmed. Not only are they getting assignments from the office, they have to respond to the various police districts when arrests of juveniles are made.
Right.
And then they got court. But every person has a value, like in the Gacy case, people are still looking and wondering what happened to their child who disappeared in the 70s.
Yep.
Mrs. Marino, who was told, after the trial, after they told her, don't go to the trial, your son's not a victim. When she got the phone call that said, your son is a victim, she challenged them.
Right.
And like I told your listeners in the other interview that we did, how she came to my house and told me the story about what she had to go through searching for her son and not getting any help. But after the trial and after she gets told that this is your son's body, she made a big to-do of the thing and went to the police at Area 6, and now it's Area 3, and told them that she didn't believe in the identification. She was going to challenge it. And like I told before, the most unbelievable story about her being arrested and held for 2 and 3 days, being told that she was an offender in a murder case, only to be let go later. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just big cities, Bob. Eau Claire, Wisconsin, they get one, maybe none, maybe no murders, maybe 1 or 2 murders in a year. Great community, college town. But when you have 1 murder in the year and you don't solve it, it becomes an issue, especially if it's an issue when the new elections come in and somebody's challenging the state's attorney job. And so I did a case up there where a gentleman by the name of Evan Zimmerman was wrongfully arrested for a homicide of a woman who was found murdered on her wedding night. Okay. This woman had gotten married earlier in the day, and at the wedding hall, she got in a fight with her new husband, and they went home, and more fighting there. And later, she was found murdered on the street. But when the police had come to the fight at the house, they locked up her husband because he had warrants, and they took him into custody. So he luckily was not a suspect in the murder. Okay. But they worked on that case for over a year, and they kept going after this guy, Evan Zimmerman, who had been at one time a boyfriend, but they had broken up the relationship like 7 months prior. And Evan was a drunkard, but he had a problem because for an alibi, he had the worst of circumstances. He lived alone. All right. He was a big drinker. He lived alone. And his only witness on the night that this happened was his dog that could verify that he was home alone. Okay. With the dog. Anyway, for a year, they chased Evan Zimmerman, accusing him of the murder. And Evan, drunk or sober, was saying, hey, I didn't do it. But if you think I did it and you have evidence I did it, come and arrest me. I ain't going nowhere. Well, just before the election, he gets locked up and charged with the murder. All right. And I was retained by attorneys to look into that homicide case. And the first meeting with Evan in the jail, I tell him, like I usually tell my clients in lockup, I come into the case not knowing anything about it. But when I'm going to get done, I'm going to know if you're the guilty guy or if you're not. And I'm going to tell your attorney. It's up to him to defend you, not to me. But I don't create evidence. I don't create false testimony. I'm going to look in the case for the facts, and I give it to the attorney. And as a defense attorney, you yourself know you don't want bad information when you step into the courtroom.
For sure.
Because it's going to fall apart. It's going to fall apart. And so I always return to the lawyers and give them what I know to be true. And some of that will help them in their defense, but I'm not going to create false evidence. Okay. And I believe the guilty should go to jail. So with Evan's case, I did the investigation, and they targeted him because they just wanted to close that case. Sounds familiar. And it ended this way. He got convicted at trial and sentenced to life in prison. I knew he wasn't the offender, and I had an idea who the offender was. So I asked his attorney, who didn't do a very good job of defending Evan at the trial. Even when I was asked to testify, he didn't ask me any of the questions I thought he would. All right. And Evan was found guilty. So I went to the attorney that defended him, and I asked for the court file, and he gave it to me, and I took it to the University of Wisconsin. The first time I'd ever gone into the law school anywhere, to their Innocence Project, and I told them, listen, this is a case where I believe this man is innocent. You need to work on this case because he's innocent. So over the next 3 years, I worked with them and interviewed. We went over my investigation, okay, with the student attorneys that they had at the law school. They would accompany me, and I would take them to where I had already done interviews and re-interview people. And we were able to get a second trial. I mean, Evan called me up. They released him after they had asked for the second trial. They released him to live in Wisconsin, and he was living alone. And he called me up and he said, Bill, they just offered me a deal. He says, they're offering me, if I take an Alford plea, that I can walk out of jail without being prosecuted or without any more time. Well, you know, you're going to admit to a crime,
right,
under that Alford plea, but you're looking at life in prison.
Right. You take that. The guy's going to take that all day.
Yeah. Well, he said to me, shouldn't I take it? And I said, Evan, no. This time I'll tell you, your attorney's not going to tell you what to do. He doesn't want to do that. It's your decision. But I'll tell you, I've had hundreds of homicide cases. And in this case, the investigation that I have done and shared with the law school, we have enough evidence that this time, Evan, they're going to be on trial and not you. Okay. He turned it down. He said, Bill, I'm an innocent man. I'm going to go to trial.
Good for him.
Yeah. So he went to trial, and I was in Chicago now, not in Wisconsin. So the trial was being held not in Eau Claire. They moved it to another county. Okay. And I knew I was going to have to testify in the defense case. All right. But they were putting on, the prosecution was putting on their witnesses, and the case was falling apart. I mean, everybody I had interviewed, they had created evidence, falsified evidence against him. All right. And I mean, and then they had people saying things that were false too. You know, one young lady who dated the lieutenant who ran the investigation, she was a primary witness in a case who had said that she heard Evan tell her before it was on the news that this woman had died. Okay. But when she met with me, I was able to get the truth out of it. So when she came on the stand, she really tore that case apart. And then it was getting up to the point where they were going to have to put the lead detective, lieutenant, on the stand. And they didn't want to do that anymore because the case had fallen apart. All right. Because I knew he had falsified evidence.
Right.
Right. And so what they did was they called for to meet with the defense team. And they said, listen, we're going to drop it. We're going to drop all charges. And he's going to go free. So Evan went free. But also I had put pressure on them because when it was going to trial for the second time in Chicago, I went to Bill Curtis's the American Justice program, the cable TV show that he was doing, American Justice. And I told them that this is a case in Wisconsin that the man is innocent. You need to be involved in. You know, it's a good story. Yeah. And so they were able to get allowed to film the trial and everything. All right. So the camera in the courtroom also brought a lot of pressure on them. They made the result of that trial and the investigation they did a 2-hour cable documentary on it called
American Justice.
Yeah, on American Justice, the retrial of Evan Zimmerman. I think that was done in about 2005.
Wow.
You know, but Evan walked away free, and as he should, as he was innocent. All right. But you know, they were trying to close a case, and they, like I said, they don't get them. Sometimes they have a year with no murders. God bless.
Right.
You know, I'm coming from Chicago. All right. But every life has value.
Right.
Okay. It's horrific to be murdered, the murder victim. But in my defense of people now, and sharing it with you, you're destroying a life of a person who's innocent when you put him in prison. He might as well be dead too.
For sure.
You know,
there's no question.
And the other thing about it is, when I was I still in Wisconsin when this happened? There's another case I've got here. The people can find it on the internet. I was retained by a very good, the same attorney for the Village of Somerset, Tim O'Brien. He had contacted me about a case that was about a family, husband, the wife, and all their children except one boy who was not with them at the time had died in a traffic accident in northern Wisconsin. And the one boy, because he wasn't with them, he was a survivor for the family. Well, there was a fight within the family for custody of the child, but also you're going to get custody of the family's wealth, I guess. You know, that's the way I was told. So the attorney asked me to look into the case and the family to see what I could find out. Well, I'm looking for evidence to separate this one family side from the other family side. And I uncovered evidence that in 1968, in Red Wing, Minnesota, which borders the Mississippi River between Wisconsin and Minnesota, in this very quiet community of Red Wing, one morning, a man walking to work this December, I think it was in December morning. No, it was in November 9th, 1968. He hears what he thought was a cat making noise from a sewer in the street. And he walked over to the sewer and he looked in and he saw a bag that got hung up on some metal. It didn't fall all the way through. And he heard the noise in the bag and he pulled the bag out of the sewer. It wasn't a cat, Bob. It was a newborn baby boy.
Oh, boy.
And he immediately rushed that boy into the hospital. The boy was almost, because of November, his temperature had fallen so low, they didn't think he was going to survive. Plus, he had heart problems, and they thought that might be the end of him. But anyway, this boy was later adopted and raised by a good family. And he was given the name of John Anderson. Okay. When he was 9 years old, his adoptive parents sat him down and showed him the newspaper articles about the boy in the sewer and told him, this is how you came into our life. All right. And I learned later in conversation with the boy when I finally met him, that when he found out when he was in his teens, he would walk to the sewer or drive over to where the sewer was, and he'd sit there and he would cry, wondering, why was he treated like garbage and thrown away? Okay. Well, when I had this information and connected it to the one party in this lawsuit, I followed up on it, and it resulted in me learning that she was actually the mother of that child. She lived on the block where the boy's body was found in the sewer, where, well, not body, but the boy was found in the sewer. And it should have been an easy case to solve, Bob. I mean, it was not a very big community. I'm guessing now 20,000 people. And, you know, she was pregnant for months. I mean, somebody had to notice her as being pregnant, and now she's not anymore. The police should have done a house by house search on that neighborhood, on that street. They did not make an arrest. I learned who the investigator was in that case. He was a long time retired. And I contacted him, I think he was in Florida. I called him by phone and I told him who I was. And I said, I want to ask you about a certain case that you were in charge of, about a newborn baby thrown in the sewer. And he said, you know, I don't remember that. And I said, how many babies have you found in sewers in your lifetime? You don't remember this? You know, and he says, sorry, can't help you. And he hung up the phone. Well, I'm not the police. I'm just a private investigator. So I go to the police department, go back to the police department. I'm asking them for information and help. And they're telling me, well, yeah, you know, that case, that's an old case. You know, we probably don't even have the reports anymore because we moved from one location to the new police department years ago. And that report is probably gone. I says, well, would you look for it? Well, you know, we're real busy. I says, how about this? Look, can you have somebody assigned to me? Let me go with and look. And they allowed me to go to the storage area with another officer. And I found the reports, okay, about the investigation. And it showed that they did nothing really in that case. But through my investigation and following up on this woman, talking to her ex-husband and stuff, he was suspicious that she might have been the mother of that child. He married her after that, so he didn't know at the time, you know. But he was suspicious of it. But I was able to not only find out that she was the mother of the child, of course, she had just given birth. I was suspicious. Did you walk down the street and dump the baby in the bag? Or did somebody help you? Well, I found out who helped her, a friend of hers. I went and tried to interview her too, but she wouldn't talk to me. She slammed the door in my face. Okay. But I gathered the information that I had, and I then took it to the police department and the newspaper. All right. Because like I said, 1968, I'm doing this in 2002, 2000. Well, I'm doing my investigation in 2000, 2001. And this happened in 68. Police department's not looking for it. All right. They don't want to reopen this case. But with the pressure of the newspaper, again, it's in the news. And they ran about a 4 or 5 day articles about my investigation. And finally, they had to go talk to her. And she admitted being the mother of the child. Okay. But, you know, the baby didn't die, Bob.
Yeah.
So according to the state's attorney, the statute of limitations was in play. And she admitted to the crime, but they didn't charge her with anything. Didn't charge her with anything because she never left the community, but they never came to talk to her.
It seems like it should have been attempt murder. They had a statute.
Yeah, well, you know, state's attorneys, you know, there was another part of the story. Who's the father of that child?
Right.
The information I had that back in 1968, it was somebody in the police department.
Wow.
But they didn't want to follow that up. So they wrote up all the articles about the investigation. And the best part of it, Bob, was I was able to meet with John Anderson, the boy that had been thrown in the sewer, and tell him who his mother was. And he was really appreciative of getting that information. He had now a grown man in his 30s with a loving wife and 3 or 4 children. You know, I said everything's online. You can find through the newspapers in Red Wing, Minnesota. But a really nice kid, young man now with a family that to him was so important.
Wow.
And he never wanted to meet with his mother. He said, I was thrown away like garbage. I have no connection to her anymore, no respect for her. She should walk and hang her head in shame wherever she goes.
No doubt.
Yeah. And so that's the way that one ended. But imagine that.
I can't. Like,
Hours old, thrown in the sewer, and he survived. But he had a good adoptive parents who took great care of him.
it's brutal. It's
Yeah.
absolutely brutal. All right. So tell us about Russell Nelson.
Russell was 21 years old from Cloquet, Minnesota. He had gone to the University of Minnesota in the Minneapolis area, and was a student there. Everybody liked Russell. He was a really nice kid, religious type of person. But he moved in with a professor by the name of Thomas Maurer, who was in his 60s at the time, and he lived in a very nice apartment, and he took Russell in with him. And Maurer was a known minister and taught at the school, University of Minnesota, and lectured on sexuality, okay, in the University Medical School. And like I said, he was an ordained minister. Well, he convinced Russell to move in with him, and he treated him like a son. And Russell, a good, hardworking kid, not only a student, but very worried about his family and their ability to pay for his education. So Russell took on 2 jobs of his own, working about 60 hours a week to get money. And everybody liked Russell, and but everybody knew that Russell was gay. Okay, and Russell would hang at a gay club called the Gay 90s that was in the Minnesota, and he would meet people there. And among the people he would meet was a guy by the name of Robert Young. Robert Young was about 7 or 8 years older than Russell. They formed a relationship together. Russell now had a nickname in the gay community as known as Parker, and this Robert Young was known to the gay community as Cowboy. Okay, Robert Young came from South Dakota. All right, and he was in Minnesota working at the time in a drugstore remodel for John Gacy. Okay. I don't suspect that Russell ever met John Gacy in Minnesota, but what happened was the bonding between Young and Nelson. Nelson told his mother that he was taking a trip with this Robert Young, going to travel to Chicago, and they were going to go meet with a guy who was a carpenter and spend some time in Chicago before going on to other places. Well, he left with Robert Young, and days went by, and then the mother got a phone call from Robert Young, who called her to say that he had reported her son missing. And of course, she was, really shocked, and but couldn't get much information out of Robert Young. So she went to the police out there where she lived in Cloquet, Minnesota, and she reported her son missing there too, based on the information from Robert Young, but she had no details. Okay. Well, Robert Young became involved in a Gacy case. All right. And it was because the police learned from Mrs. Nelson about him having information. So when Nelson is identified, the Cook County Sheriff's Office was in charge, and they had only one investigator from Chicago. And that investigator, a good detective, followed up on it, and he contacted people trying to find Robert Young. But the detective gets a phone call from Robert Young, who's in Florida, calling him willing to answer any questions about about Russell going missing. And he takes that information. All right. But I was curious about how did how did Robert Young in Florida know to call Chicago? And how did he learn that the police wanted to talk to him? And I connected that information to the reports that I had recovered, that a guy named, what's his name? It's, I want to get it right for you. Jim Burnett. Jim Burnett was important to me because he was connected to Russell Nelson. He was actually, Young had told the police they were going to stay with Burnett at Burnett's apartment in Chicago. But I learned later that he didn't stay there when he first got to Chicago. He stayed with other people. But when I tracked down Burnett told me that he accidentally ran into Young and Nelson in a gay club in Chicago. And that was the night that Russell Nelson disappeared. And Burnett claimed not to have any knowledge of the disappearance. All right. But when I talked to him, Burnett he's in his 60s, living in the Lakeview area of Chicago. And when I met with him, he had a young man of 19 or 20 years old who was living with him there. When I talked to Burnett, he told me that he'd been born and raised in Chicago all his life, been living there in Chicago. I took that as fact. All right. And he going over the story about how he knew Robert Young and the association with Robert Young when they were younger. They both worked as waiters at a restaurant. And they stayed in touch with each other. And whenever Young would come into Chicago, he would often stay with Burnett. And through Young, that's how he met the Nelson boy at the club. All right. And Burnett claimed not to have any other information about that. He said, except that I think he was going to go to another gay club, and I don't know what happened, never saw him again. Well, I found out from other people that Burnett wasn't being honest with me. All right. First off, Russell Nelson and Young didn't stay with Burnett right away, because when they came to Chicago intending to stay with Burnett wasn't there. So they went to another home where Young had friends. And these friends let the two of them stay in an apartment in the building that they owned. And they were with them for about 3-4 days. They went out on various trips with them, but they went to the bars one night with them, but only one night. And anyway, it was not coinciding with what Burnett was telling me. So, but years later, I went back and I searched for Burnett, information on Burnett, and I found out, Burnett lied to me. He was not born and raised in Chicago. He was born in the Kalamazoo, Michigan area. And I learned that he had moved back there now, where he had family all the time. Well,
after you visited him?
What? Yeah.
After you interviewed him?
After the interviews, years after I did it. I was still suspicious about him, because there was another thing about him. He claimed not to know Gacy. All right. And, but the police had found his phone pager in Gacy's house. Okay. Wow. That raises, a big flag right away. You don't know him? You never been there? Well, the police recovered this item there. So he's not telling me the truth there. But why Kalamazoo is of interest to me, because two boys from Michigan, let's see, that was, I want to make sure I get it right. It's been so many years, Bob. Oh my God. Anyway, there's two boys from Michigan that are among Gacy's victims. All right. And these two boys didn't know each other. They did not know each other, and they disappeared years apart. Okay. But they were both found buried under Gacy's house. And they were, like I said, they lived in the Kalamazoo area. Burnett was from Kalamazoo. The police never talked to the families of these two boys. I'm talking about the sheriff's department. When the boys were identified, all they did was call the family and say, listen, well, your son's been identified here in Chicago, a murder victim of John Gacy. Come and get the body. That's where your investigation starts, or should start.
Right.
But there's no investigation. So I went out and I contacted family. And in the one case in particular, I learned that there was a witness, let's say, to the disappearance. What happened was I met with the brother of the one victim, and he told me that years after his brother had been identified and buried, he met one of his brother's friends. And the friend told him, you know, the day that your brother went missing, I was with him. He said, I was in the McDonald's restaurant with him. He got dropped off by his girlfriend, and we were just sitting there. And suddenly this guy walked up to us and started talking to us, telling us he's a carpenter from Chicago working in the area, and would either of them or both of them be interested in the job. And then this one person told his brother that, no, I'm not interested, but the guy's brother did go and leave with John, who he identified as John Gacy from the news. That was the person in the Kalamazoo area who took the victim with him back to Chicago. Police never talked to him. And in the other case too, I was suspicious because I talked to the family and learned that this boy had disappeared he had gone to Chicago to stay with an older man that was a family friend. Okay. But years later, the parents were dead, and the siblings of that boy victim couldn't identify who that family friend was. All right. I don't know. Could it have been Burnett? I don't know. I'm not accusing him, but boy, I think he's somebody that has a lot of information, because what else happened with Burnett? He told me not only did he accidentally run into Young and Nelson in the bar in Chicago, it was Crystal Blinkers was the bar, and accidentally met with them, but within Gacy's arrested in December of 78, in like the first week of January 79, he's telling me he accidentally runs into Young in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, in a club. All right. And that's after the Nelson boy's been identified. So I believe it's probably through Burnett that he told Young that the police want to talk to him. Okay. And that's why Young called the detective back in Chicago. But, you know, you're a detective in a mass murder case. The guy that brings you to the city where the person goes missing and is found dead, a phone call's not enough, Bob.
No, not even.
You got to sit down with this guy. You want to know everything. Well, what I learned was going through the family in Minnesota and through the Cloquet Police Department and Sheriff's Department, from the sheriff there, I learned that he had reported to the Cook County Sheriffs that Robert Young was known as a procurer of young boys.
Oh, man.
But they don't want to talk to him. His pager's in Gacy's house. And how do you have two accidental encounters? You know?
Yeah, you don't.
And this encounter is within weeks of Gacy being arrested and Nelson being identified.
Yeah.
They just let it slide.
So I mean, those two, like, I'm assuming, like, so Robert Lynch, he was a Kalamazoo kid.
Yeah, Lynch.
And then
And
Prestige was the other kid
Correct.
from Michigan.
You got it.
So, I mean, did anybody ever look into this Young guy? Like, between the connection between Young?
From what I was told by the two people who rebutted the information from Burnett, Burnett said that they stayed with him. the other two guys that said, no, that's not true. They stayed with us. Okay.
Yeah, but Young was the one that brought him down to Chicago. You know what I mean? Like Young
knew everybody. He knew all the gay places, you know?
So did you, when you were digging into this, I mean, did you now did NamUs exist at that point?
Well, it did now in the 20s, I mean 2000 years, but I'm not the police anymore.
Right. Well, I mean,
So
we can get to NamUs because what I'm getting at is like we need to figure out like the time frame that both these kids went missing from Kalamazoo area. You know, who else went missing? Like clearly this guy Burnett sounds like he was procuring kids for Gacy, and it sounds like this Young guy might have had a connection as well. You know what I mean? Clearly Burnett and Young know each other, right?
Right.
You know, so I mean that's how we have to put those pieces together in terms of
and then
if anyone else was missing from that area around that time.
The phone call of interest too. The phone call made to the detective who's now assigned to the sheriff's department from Chicago is followed up. That conversation with the investigators followed up by a letter that is mailed to him at the sheriff's department from Young. And I have the envelope, but not the letter. Okay. I don't know. That disappeared. Okay. But looking at the timestamp, it was actually mailed from Miami, Florida, not Fort Lauderdale. But the return address was to Robert Young at this address in Fort Lauderdale. Well, that was when I had talked to Robert Young about that. Why was he in Florida anyway? When he encountered meeting Young, he told me I was there looking to buy a house in Fort Lauderdale. I said, okay, did you buy a house? Yeah, I bought a house. I said, do you remember the address of the house that you bought? And he said, he thought a while. He says, I don't remember the exact address anymore, but it was on 13th Street in Fort Lauderdale. Well, when I went back looking through the case again, I found that envelope that was mailed to Jerry Lawrence, who was a detective, and it had an address of 1642 Southeast 13th Street. So I learned that Bobbitt had said he bought the house, but he didn't remember the address. But in checking his records, it showed he never owned property there. Never owned property there.
Is that guy still alive?
He's still alive. He's up in Michigan. I mean, yeah, he's up in the Kalamazoo area. Anyway, I checking the address now. I found out that address belonged to a guy named Dick Bobbitt. Dick Bobbitt had been the mayor of Oak Forest, Illinois, prior to that. So he had a little bit of a political connection, I'm sure, to people in Chicago.
Yeah.
I'm not accusing, he's long dead. Dick Bobbitt is dead. All right. But that house where Young is and mailing and calling from makes me think about Dean Carell, or John Norman, I should say. John Norman, with his setting up houses around the country for gay men to go and have sex with other young boys.
Right.
And now I got Young going there. Burnett knows of this house and other things, and things are starting to fall into a connection here about maybe there's a connection even bigger.
Yeah.
You know, because I mean, there's no information at all about the sexuality of Bobbitt, but the connection is that house. And the house to a known procurer of young boys by the name of Robert Young. Okay. And Burnett also being in that community, knowing of it. Very suspicious. Very suspicious. But nobody wanted to go there. The police department with that information, even after Detective Lawrence writes up the reports about talking to Young, the information on the police reports is of value isn't from the sheriff's department reports, more came from the sheriff's department in Cloquet, Minnesota. Having followed it up, talking to Young's family, and learning that from other people that he was a procurer of young boys, and learning that he had worked at the Seltzer pharmacy remodeling when Gacy was there. You know, and then you put that pager. You know, I never knew Gacy. I never been to his house, but then the reports, his pager. The police did want to know, why was your pager found at that location? And he said, I lost it. I don't know. I lost it. But if you don't ask questions, Bob, you don't get answers. But that was the whole thing. Nobody's calling up the boys and families in Michigan and asking, the Parker family or Winch, asking if they're.
I mean, no one did anything like that.
No.
Like, no one did anything.
No.
And like what we're trying to do in terms of the search for more victims is it's really helpful for us on the front end to get people that have reached out. Like we have Becky Wakefield, who has reached out about Roger Aguirre, who I don't even know if you remember, because we did a Zoom with her last year. He went missing. He worked for Gacy. He frequented gay clubs in Chicago and went missing in 1975. Hispanic guy, and he's never been found. The guy vanished off the face of the earth. Same with John Deeney, who was out in Iowa. One of my listeners, longtime listeners, Brian Roush, came to me. He's a distant family member of Deeney. Yeah. And, you know, when we finally get to digging at Elston in Miami,
and other locations.
I mean, having a jumping off point on who these kids might have been and who they are is going to be super helpful, you know, and it's like kind of like trying to put these pieces together where, you know, we talked about last week briefly that, you know, one of the things that we really need are just Gacy's his business records, because his business records, he may or may not have killed when he was on the road, but what he very well might have done is made connections with people that would procure boys for him and bring them down to where he was comfortable doing what he did. You know what I mean? It's like, there's just so many tentacles to it that, you know,
Bob, he had a playbook, you know. He was a serial killer. He had a playbook. He had a plan. He had options about how to go after his victims. He'd try to invite them home, offer them jobs, offer them narcotics. And at times when it didn't go his way, he'd pull out the gun and the badge, you know. But his whole thing was because it wasn't a quick kill. He wanted you home in his house where he's got the board ready. Right. He's got the handcuffs. He's got the restraints. Nobody else is there.
And the place to dispose of the body until
where he's disposing of the bodies until it got so full that he had to start dumping them in the river.
Right.
And before the house, he was dumping them over on Miami Avenue because he couldn't dump them under the house so much because he had to do it only if the wife wasn't there.
Right.
Right. So he was in that was a problem for him in the early part. But then the house, when it started to fill up, he was running out of space. But the house was his playroom. You know, I mean, he wanted, it wasn't a quick kill. He was entertainment. That victim was entertainment for him.
Right.
To torture, photos, whatever. And we have evidence through people who were tortured that Gacy was not alone when he was sexually assaulting him.
Right.
All right. And you just saw the interview with what's her name, the attorney. I know I can't remember her name right now. The one that just wrote the book. The one that just wrote the other book about Gacy, defending Gacy.
Terry Conti.
Yes. Conti. Yeah. And she's got the business record, she says.
Yeah, I don't know if she still has them because
she says in the interview weeks ago, she says that she has them.
Well, my connection with her is so she was Gacy's death penalty lawyer, like the last set. I happened to, when I went to law school, her partner on that was Richard Kling, which I told you.
Yes.
Kling was my law school professor. He was my criminal law clinic advisor. So like I've got this connection with Kling and Conti to where, because I had always heard that the business records were in the warehouse. which seemed like bullshit to me. Like, because that's where they archived most of the physical evidence. I don't know why documents would have been in there. You know, like I told you when I was doing the, you know, the my Gacy season, when I went down to the Daily Center and pulled all the files, because I was getting, you know, I was literally copying all the transcripts for the trial at like all the motion hearings and every motion that was filed in that case. And then I'm sitting in there in the last box that I look in, I told you the story that the actual, the physical photo receipt was in one of the boxes in the archives at the Daily Center. I couldn't believe it. I was so close to wanting to pocket that thing and walk out of there just so I could get some testing done on it. I would have returned it, but I was so desperate to do it, you know, because where we're at right now, just so people have an understanding, you know, before I drag Bill back to the States with his bad hip, you know, like I have to assume that I'm going to have to raise some capital in order to get the guy who owns the property at Miami and Nelson is privately owned. When we went there a year and a half ago and did our latest ground penetrating radar scan, when we snuck on the property again, this younger guy, I'd say, what would you say? He was in his 30s, Bill?
Yeah,
So,
late.
he was young. Like he saw us. They had, it wasn't a ring camera, but he had security camera like mounted on the corner of the building. We were probably 15 minutes into the scan when this guy comes out. I had been sitting, like Darren, my producer, was filming Bill as Bill was walking with the GPR guy. I was sitting in my car and, you know, this guy comes out. So I see him come out. Bill's talking to him a bit. You know, I kind of intercede into the conversation and I started having a detailed, you know, conversation with this kid. And I'm like, look, man, I mean, I'm like, you're aware of this property, right? I mean, you know, the history of it. And he's like, well, he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you know, you've heard of John Wayne Gacy. He's like, I think so. You know, like he was pretty evasive. He wasn't as pissed as I thought he would have been.
Yeah.
She
Right.
gave me kind of a feeling like, all right, we can work with this guy. I mean, to me, it's like you and I have been trying to sell this story, not so much because we want to be on TV, because we want the money that we need to be able to get a location agreement in order to get on that property to do the dig. I mean, we cannot sneak on the property with shovels and do the dig. We are not going to have the assistance of the Chicago police or the Cook County sheriffs to do the dig. They've done their 2 sham digs there. They're done with it. They have no interest in finding it. That's what, like, the reason that Bill and I kind of keep telling you guys these stories about the resistance that we're getting from the Chicago police, the city of Chicago itself, and the Cook County sheriff. You know, I mean, like they just don't want to deal with any Gacy shit. So that's the resistance that we're having to deal with consistently and always, and it'll never go away. It'll never be a situation where I'm going to be able to walk in and talk to Jason Moran, who's the guy who's overseeing the identification of the still 5 unidentified bodies. I mean, I have a connection with Othram Labs, which is the best lab in the country right now. You got Parabon and you got Othram, which are doing work that's unparalleled in terms of being able to, like, absolutely take the most minuscule sample of DNA and be able to pull a profile on it. And then to back that up, they'll do the genealogical DNA work on it, and they'll figure out who this guy is. Like, they'll do it. Like Othram, if I could get Moran to just turn over whatever they have, whatever bone samples they have of the last 5 victims, they're going to find out who they are. I think that you know what? I've figured out why they're so reticent, why they keep delaying it, Bill, because when they pull those bones out of that body, they're terrified that they're going to have another Michael Marino situation, because these bones were, you had bodies buried upon buried, upon buried, buried upon buried. Oh my God, buried. I've been on way too long today. Bodies buried upon bodies. And it's like, you know, the bones could be anybody's in terms of, like, they're not necessarily matching skeletons. You know what I'm saying? So like somebody that they've already identified, who they've identified as a number at this point, who's still a number, if they then send that off to the lab and we get a hit and it turns out to be somebody that they've already identified, it creates a nightmare scenario for them.
Yeah, it is. And that's what I remember with Michael Marino when we found out that he wasn't his DNA didn't match the body. I thought, well, maybe they did accidentally switch because his body was supposedly found above or under another body, and he disappeared with the Parker boy, Kenny Parker. Right. So I had the attorneys also go into court and get permission from the family also to do the exhumation and the DNA, and that didn't match Michael Marino either. But the one thing about bodies, Bob, once you bury them, they're not moving from one place to another.
It's a true story.
Okay. And Gacy was very meticulous about knowing where he put the bodies, and he gave the police diagrams. So I don't think where there were two bodies buried, he told them, there were two bodies. But I don't think there was the bodies that they dug up were not intact. Of course, bodies fall apart. But unless they were buried one on top of the other, the bodies couldn't, I don't think, be commingled. But at the lab or in transport or in packaging, certainly you could make a mistake,
there's no question. I mean, back then they just didn't have the resources and the technology to be able to identify people beyond,
right.
Records.
Fingerprints and blood and tattoos were important even,
Yeah. And but these were all skeletal, you know what I mean? Like that kind of shit didn't exist. These are a bunch of, literally bones. So, I think that ultimately, and we're currently in the process. We've signed another shopping agreement with somebody that, is doing his best to try to get this thing sold. And again, like our motive behind it is not because we want to be on TV, but because we want them to fund the money that we need to maybe put forward to get this guy to allow us to dig on the property, which we don't know if that kid, Bill, is very skeptical that guy.
He didn't give us a direct answer like he had control of what was going to happen at that property.
Because like that kid, I feel like I can get him in a room and I can just appeal to his better nature and just say, look, man, I mean, you can be the hero of this story. Just let us do this. Like one of two things is going to happen. One, we find bodies, in which case you're the hero because you've allowed us to come onto your land and just finish this once and for all. And now we give these families some semblance of closure. Whoever may still be alive, there's got to be distant relatives that are obviously alive for all these kids that will want to know. And or two, we don't find anything at that location. And then
that's fine.
Right, but then it's over for him. It's a win-win either way. Because either he's the hero of the story, or like he never has to deal with it again because we've done a full recon and a full dig there on the property. It's simple.
Right. And I can live with that. If there's no bodies there, as an investigator, I got the answer now. That's all it was about.
Right. Exactly.
But there was enough suspicion over these years. I know that from the time that they uncovered those bodies and took them down to the county morgue until Michael Marino's mother got the case in the courtroom, nobody in the sheriff's department or police department in Chicago was looking to find out who these kids were.
Yeah, I know, man.
Nobody.
I know. Nobody still is. I mean, literally, you and I are the only two guys on the planet doing this shit. Karen Conti's like, she's doing the press circuit for her book, and she's, like saying left and right that she believes that there's more victims and that she has said that she's got the business records. I'm going to reach out to her. I'm going to see if she'll allow me to dig into them, because then I could start putting some pieces together. And the one thing that I'm confident in is, it's like somebody mentioned something to me. I'm like, I don't know why we're not getting more people on these lives. And it's because it's such an old case that like younger kids aren't aware of Gacy. They don't know about Gacy. Like when we're going to get the movement and when we're going to get the people behind what we're trying to do, is when they realize that we're actually going to be boots on the ground. So, like, and I've thrown the idea to you about starting a GoFundMe, like I don't know how much it would cost in order to get this guy to agree, but I would imagine it wouldn't be a fortune. And I'm obviously going in trying to, again, just trying to get him to agree to just let us do it. We'll make any repairs. We're talking about
the righteous thing to do. I mean, it's
the righteous thing to do.
First off, you can't ask the Chicago Police Department to do this.
No, that's what I'm saying. That's not an option.
And you can't ask. I told how I went to the FBI. All right, and they were involved in the second search. Well, actually, the FBI brought out 3 dogs, canine dogs, to sniff for about a minute each, and determined there's no bodies here.
Right.
We're not a very good search, not good use of canine dogs either. So the only involvement we can do is hope to do it ourselves. But
that's it. I mean, that's it. So and it's basically you and I right now, because like we've been trying for the last year to get a production company to take the story, but we keep hitting resistance because Berlinger put out his thing, and then Tracy Ullman put out her thing the year before on Peacock. So
information.
Right. Well, right, exactly, and it's like we keep getting the same, the same resistance that people, it's like it's Gacy'd out, like people. Which is bullshit. Like Gacy is always going to be of interest. People are always going to watch Gacy shit. But like we're trying to do something different. Like we're not trying to retell some Gacy story. We're trying to find additional victims. We're doing something completely different. And the resistance that we get when we give the pitch is that they're like, oh, well, we don't want another Al Capone's vault situation. And we're like, well, this story isn't just about the dig. This story is about everything that wasn't done in terms of the investigation into these kids. And you either know or you don't know. And anybody that thinks that Gacy was inactive for the 3 years between McCoy and Butkovich is full of shit. Like that's not how serial killers work. That's just not how they work. Tim McCoy is his first known victim. And oddly enough, I have this weird connection with Tim McCoy. I don't know if I told you this story, Bill. Did I tell you about the Tim McCoy thing with the Lucy Studi story with the woman who's claiming that her father was a serial killer over in Iowa and that I was out there? They were doing a dig because she had said that her father had dumped all these bodies in this well. And I was like boots on the ground out there. And, I'm sitting there talking to one of the sheriffs who were actively trying to keep me off the property because I was TikToking. So they all knew that I was there. And I was there to keep them honest. I was there because I wanted them to I wanted to know they were being genuine in what they were doing. I was well aware of the sham dig that went on in '94 at Miami and Elston. So that's always at the forefront of my mind. And, I had promised Lucy Studi, I'm like, look, I'm going to be out there. I'm going to try my damnedest to get on the land. They're going to be aware that I'm there. And I hope that I'm going to be able to keep them honest. So I'm sitting there talking with this sheriff, super nice guy. And he's like I'm shooting the shit with them, like across this fence line on this huge ridge in this Green Hollow area of Iowa. And, he tells me this story. I'm like, oh yeah, I've got, it's like, I kind of got into this, I was a lawyer in my former life and now I'm trying to do some victim advocacy and I'm out here, and I'm basically just trying to make sure that these feds are doing an actual, a dig here, that they're not out here full of shit just to shut this woman up once and for all. Because she is much like you. She's been insistent for 40 years that her father did all this shit. Her sister is sitting there screaming that she's a liar and that she's just trying to make money and it's all a scam and we're all fools. So I've got this whole thing going on with it. And this guy, when I tell him about my Gacy season, he's like, oh shit. He's like, you know what? He's like, Tim McCoy. He's like, do you ever heard the name Tim McCoy? I'm like, of course. I'm like, it's Gacy's first victim. He's like, yeah. He was like right here. He came from here, right in Green Hollow. He's actually a distant relative of Lucy Studi. So like this woman that I've been working with for at that point, like almost a year, like there's this weird cosmic twist for me where like my mind almost explodes, that there's this connection. Like, because like I had called Lucy Studi when that story broke just to like talk to her. You know, I wanted to try to vet her out to see if this smelled like bullshit or if it seemed like it was legitimate. So to find out that she's actually related to Gacy's first victim, and I had been following that story, just seemed like this is all what I'm supposed to be doing. Like I had this weird cosmic feeling about it, man. And I still can't shake it. So like you and I are adamant about getting this done. We're going to keep filling you all in on stories. Like, so like the Russell Nelson story, as you guys can see, was only tangentially about Russell Nelson. It's really about this potential network that Gacy had, these contacts that Gacy had that he would use to procure kids from out of state. And, you know, there was always this kind of misconception about Gacy that every single one of his victims was some wayward kid that he was calling off the streets of Chicago. And that's just not accurate.
Right.
It's just not the way that it went down.
True.
You know, so like that's where we're at on this thing. So we're going to keep you guys posted. You know, we need your help. We need you guys to be telling people to kind of pay more attention to this. This isn't just two guys like telling stories out of school. You know, we're really trying to make some shit happen, and we're going to need support and people that actually want to be involved with advocacy and that have a strong, and that's why I want Bill telling these stories, because he's giving you the sum and substance of why we believe that there's more victims. Like this isn't just some like bullshit where we're like, oh, he must have killed more people. No, I've had so many people contact me. I've had at least 5 people contact me of missing people in their families that are still missing to this day, that all had connections to Chicago, all in the same time frame that we're looking at between 71 and 73, and maybe going all the way up to 75. So it's like that time frame when Gacy just could not bury people in the house because Carol and her daughter and Gacy's mother and Carol's mother all lived in that house. It wasn't available to him. And Carol had smelled Tim McCoy's remains. Gacy went down and remediated it by laying down the concrete slab to cover up Tim's body in order for her not to smell it anymore, because she smelled it. So he knew that wasn't an accessible thing for him. And, you know, Carol would travel out of town, kind of like, not to the extent that I think that, Huerman's wife did, but, you know, she certainly was out there. And, like what was Gacy killing during the times, but they only found one concrete pad down there, you know? So like, I don't know that Gacy had figured out the whole lime trick and like the ways that he used to mask the smell. And, you know, like you just never heard anybody complaining about an odor in that house. And he had people in there all the time, including the people that we believe are accomplices. You know?
I mean, I was there in 74, you know,
and you didn't smell shit.
No.
Red Ozzy, that story is very much still alive and well. I know I haven't reported on it in a while, but like anything, it takes time. We are actually prospectively digging in Iowa again in July. So keep that on the down low, even though I just put it on the live.
And so, I just say, Bob, again, as an investigator, it's always about learning the truth, no matter where it takes you. Okay. And as I'm approaching 80 years old next month, that's the reason I decided, what good is all the information and I have if I don't write it out for somebody to look at it? I apologize. The Russell Nelson would have flown much better if it wasn't 5 a.m. Okay.
You don't need to apologize for shit. Well,
in the book, and like I said before, this is actual size. All right. But it's very large print. So it won't take you might think it's going to be a while, but it has the information in detail. I thought
we decided it was very small print, and that thing is only 3 pages long because they were able to cram it all onto 3 pages.
Yeah. Well, I'm always thinking of the purchaser. I don't want them to have ice cream. But anyway, that book contains the information from our investigation, from the things that I learned. And it's proof that the Chicago Police, the Sheriff's Department, the State's Attorney's Office, the FBI, nobody wanted more bodies. They closed that case with Gacy's arrest. I mean, I'm looking at the case 20, 30, 40 years later. If they would have done it correctly in the days and weeks after the first body is found, Gacy would not be the only person arrested.
No question.
Well, I sure would like to talk to Michael Rossi. Maybe he'll call
me. You and me both. You and me both.
You
think he's down in Texas, right? Is that where you heard he's last?
Yeah.
Darren and I were trying to call him because and then we finally got him on the phone because we thought he was in Illinois still. Like because I was putting him on blast on my podcast. I was all but accusing the guy of flat out being an accomplice, which I absolutely think he was, and like Darren, and Darren, Bill, Darren can be an imposing looking dude, but we were concerned that Rossi might be rolling up on us, like that he, he's always been known to have, outfit connections. And,
I don't think we've ever gone into his family and criminal background yet, have we?
No, we haven't. We
got a lot there too.
No doubt. All right. So for next Tuesday, do your homework. Tell me what we're going to talk about Gacy wise.
And remind people questions. We didn't get into that today, but if they have questions, maybe we can start with that next week.
Oh, yeah.
And the book Omnipotent, Don't Ask, Don't Tell is available on Amazon. All right. And
and Bill, we've been dropping the link in the chat the whole night. I know for a fact you've sold several books tonight. People are talking, they've already bought it. So we always run the link for the Amazon link in the chat as we're going. So my mods are amazing at doing that and always giving the support. So you'll see a bump in the numbers on the sales tonight, buddy. So again, we do want to restate it.
The information.
Yeah.
That's the only way I could do it, Bob. There was the book and then finding you. It's the only way I could tell the story.
I know it. Well,
right.
We're going to get it. It's going to be out there, man. So you guys get the book. The link's here. And Bill, I did get one question. I'm going to save it for next week because we're running an hour, 40 minutes on this one. But I did get a question. But what Bill and I want y'all to do, if you have any questions about anything Gacy related, especially about the victims, make sure that you send me an email at Bob@Defense Diaries. We will read through any questions. Obviously, if you have questions in chat, make sure that you're asking because I will post them up and I'll have Bill answer them while we're live as well. So, Bill, again, as always, I appreciate you. And I will see you once again, same bat channel, same bat time next Tuesday night.
And we're running smooth, Bob. So thank you. It's your help.
All right. And mods, I love you. Thank you. I know you've had an exhaustingly long day. I glitched out there for a second. I couldn't say body upon body. It was like it was a weird, like an actual robotic glitch. I've been on a long time today, Bill. So and my mods have as well. You guys rock the world. You guys. And Bill, this. Like you're going back to the comfy chair. No one wants you sitting on that hard, shitty chair again.
I didn't fall.
Yeah, but we don't want you sitting on an uncomfortable chair. So move your chair, your comfy chair next week. Everybody's demanding it.
Well, I don't want to cause anybody pain and suffering. So
everyone will be fine, Bill. All right, Bill, have yourself a great night. You guys, thank you for hanging with me all day. If you have been, I know a bunch of you have. Pammy, I've been seeing you all day. Shiraz, I know you've been here. Debbie, Aspiring Sarah, all you guys have been here. Afton, all you guys are amazing. I love you so much. Thank you, because without you guys, Bill and I would just be two old bastards talking about a really old case. We'll talk at you next time.
Ciao, buddy.
Ciao.